Assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. We got a pretty good episode this week since we got some WWDC prep to do. We got to get you guys ready for WWDC, which is coming up this week. On Monday is the keynote, so what we have to look forward to, what I'm excited for, got a lot of good stuff there. And also, we have a question from one of you guys that you asked in the YouTube comments on the previous episode we did, so we are going to be addressing that question. And also, in true Dark Assassins podcast fashion, we are going to be comparing something in the tech sphere to something that's not even in the same stratosphere. So all that coming up on this week's episode. And if you want your question answered, like the commenter from last week's episode, definitely leave a comment down below if you're on YouTube, or you can shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. The link for that is in the show notes below, as always. And with that preamble aside, let's get into this week's trivia question. The Ada programming language was developed during the late 1970s to early 1980s, and the programming language was named after the individual who has been credited as the first computer programmer. What was this individual's name? So, in other words, who is the Ada programming language named after? And that is your trivia question for the week. Now, I want to address the question from the YouTube comment first because it will lead directly into the cybersecurity tip for this week. Did I come up with the cybersecurity tip because of this question? Maybe, but I'll leave that for you to decide. So the question from the commenter was DGJ Warrior, and they ask, if someone were to try to use Wi-Fi networks to digitally hack into a computer, wouldn't they need to be connected to that network anyway? Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no way to just do that from home or anything, right? So, first off, thank you for the question, and I quite enjoy this question, and I think it is really good. So, first off, let's assume a couple things first. So, if we assume that the Wi-Fi network doesn't have any publicly exposed services, or on a network that has any publicly exposed services, and the threat actor were specifically trying to use Wi-Fi networks to target a device on said Wi-Fi network, then yes, they would need to be at least close to the Wi-Fi network in question in order to attempt to hack said device. So in short, yes, but it's a lot more complex than that. Because, well, I guess first I'll touch on why I say that they have to be at least near the Wi-Fi network. Because the reason I say that is because the threat actor could use a tool like AirCrackNG to essentially monitor Wi-Fi traffic from neighboring Wi-Fi networks that are around, and then they could intercept some of the packets from that Wi-Fi network and then try to use those packets in order to crack the Wi-Fi password from one of those packets, and then from that cracked password that they obtained, they could then log on to your network. But still, they would have to somehow gain access to your Wi-Fi network. Now, whether that's them using a tool like AirCrackNG, for instance, or that's you giving them your Wi-Fi password, or them guessing it on their own, or you are really bad with security and you don't have a Wi-Fi password, which you really should have a Wi-Fi password. But yeah, so if you're doing it specifically through Wi-Fi networks, then yes, they would have to be close to your Wi-Fi network in order to make that happen. So they could not do that from home unless, of course, they were like your neighbor or something, which if they were your neighbor, they're not a very nice neighbor. And if you are someone's neighbor, don't be doing this. Don't be trying to hack into your neighbor's Wi-Fi networks. Now, if you want to use a tool like AirCrackNG to try to hack into your own Wi-Fi network, I mean, that is completely up to you. You're more than welcome to do that. But of course, with anything hacking related, if you're trying to hack into something, you need to first get permission to hack into said thing before you go around and nefariously doing stuff. Or you are a penetration tester and you have the get out of jail free card, if you will, from like the CEO or whoever authorized the penetration test. So if someone does catch you, you basically have that, get out of jail free card and say, hey, look, I'm actually authorized to be doing this. And that's basically what separates the criminals from the good guys, or the black hats from the white hats. So anyway, getting back to the question. So that's specifically on Wi-Fi networks. Now, this might be going beyond the question that was asked, but I wanted to address it because it is technically still possible. And that is, in theory, you could still hack devices on a Wi-Fi network without being on the Wi-Fi network. And in order to understand this, let's kind of go through another example here. So let's suppose that all of your network connections, so your Wi-Fi connections and your Ethernet connections, use the same subnet. Depending on what you expose to the public internet, a threat actor could potentially be at their house and still hack you and gain access to your network and all the devices connected to it, including Wi-Fi devices, and therefore take over a device that is connected via Wi-Fi without actually being on your Wi-Fi network. And they wouldn't necessarily have to do this through some, exposed service that you have. If they sent you like a phishing link and you fell for the phishing attack and they got some malware on your computer to get behind your firewall, then that could be another way that they could get into your network and access your Wi-Fi devices without actually having to be on your Wi-Fi network. So going back to the publicly hosted or publicly exposed instance, let's say hypothetically you were hosting a web server, for instance, on your network, and you exposed it to the public internet. So in other words, anyone that has your IP address, that types in your IP address to their web browser, could get access to the web server that you're running. If, for instance, there was a vulnerability in that web server that would allow for some kind of remote code execution, the threat actor could then exploit that vulnerability remotely. Since the service is publicly exposed, all they need is your public IP address, which they obviously don't need to be anywhere close to you for. They could be at their house. And then once they remotely exploit that vulnerability, they could run code to give them a reverse shell on the system, which would basically allow them to do whatever they wanted on the web server. So they could do any kind of lateral movement, scan your network, try to hop to other devices, and basically do whatever they want, which is why remote code execution vulnerabilities that give remote attackers a reverse shell are so dangerous and almost always score a perfect 10 when it comes to their CVE score. So since we are assuming here that your Wi-Fi and your wired devices are all on the same subnet, the threat actor would easily be able to have access to your entire network, including those devices that are connected to Wi-Fi, and then be able to do any kind of lateral movement they wanted to try to target any of those said Wi-Fi devices. Now, they wouldn't necessarily know which devices are on Wi-Fi and which ones aren't, unless through some way of their remote exploit, they were able to, say, log into your router and maybe try to somehow access which devices are connected by a Wi-Fi and which ones are connected by Ethernet. But if they were just doing, say, a scan of the network for IP addresses, they wouldn't necessarily be able to discriminate which ones are coming from which. Now, there's a potential that they could maybe try to detect what kind of hardware was in the network and maybe try to do some kind of MAC address lookup to try to identify if this is from a Wi-Fi card or from like an Ethernet port or something. But in all reality, it's going to be a lot harder for them to detect which are Wi-Fi devices and which are wired devices unless they can somehow gain access to the router and, be able to look that information up. But this also, of course, assumes that you don't have any kind of network security in your network. So you don't have like a DMZ or a demilitarized zone. You don't have any kind of additional firewall rules in place or VLANs or virtual local area networks or any kind of access control lists, ACLs, or anything like that set up, or even any kind of intrusion detection or intrusion prevention system. We're basically kind of assuming you're your standard user that gets their Wi-Fi router modem combo thing from their ISP, plugs it in, and just connects everything to it, right? You're not, setting up all these home lab things that we like to set up, to make our networks more secure. You just have everything on like a flat network. But getting back to your original point, though, if you don't publicly expose anything to the internet, you're a lot less likely to have any of these kinds of exploits occur because you don't have anything just sitting out there waiting to be exploited. Now, that's again not to say that you are invulnerable, because as we've mentioned before on the podcast, the only way a device is truly invulnerable is if it's completely disconnected from everything and completely unplugged and powered off completely with no means of turning it on. But again, I guess you could also make the argument that that's still vulnerable because someone could break in and steal the device, which, touche. But the point being, you're a lot less likely to be hacked if you don't have anything publicly exposed. But again, like I said, if a threat actor sent you some kind of phishing attack and you fell for the phishing attack and you got malware on your system, that could potentially give the threat actor a backdoor into your network without actually having to be anywhere near your network or exploit any kind of vulnerability on something that you have public facing. And another reason why threat actors like to do the phishing attack to get you to download malware is because generally that gets them behind any kind of firewalls or anything like that, because usually, especially in like the corporate world, when you are publicly exposing services, you have multiple layers to your network, right? So your publicly exposed services don't, interact with your day-to-day devices or your network attached storage or your databases, or sometimes they'll be connected to your databases through firewall rules, and everything is really locked down to control where traffic can go. So in the event that an attacker does gain access to one of those systems, they are very limited on what they can get access to and what damage they can cause. But if you get malware infected on a device that's behind all those layers, then you can, essentially do what you want. So that is kind of the keys here. But I guess to summarize, if you are specifically targeting Wi-Fi networks by logging into Wi-Fi networks to attack devices, then yes, you have to be in range of the Wi-Fi network you're trying to access in order to do anything nefarious. But you don't have to go through Wi-Fi in order to attack devices that are connected via Wi-Fi, I guess is what I'm saying. There are multiple ways around it that you can exploit depending on how the network is configured and set up. So I hope that answers your question. I really enjoyed being able to answer it, and it was definitely a great question. So if any of you, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, if any of you have any questions or comments or topics you want answered in future episodes, be sure to either shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com, link in the show notes below, or leave a comment on YouTube if you are on there. And speaking of this whole cybersecurity stuff, that is a great segue into this week's cybersecurity tip. So as we kind of just discussed in the answering the question from the YouTube comment, one thing that you definitely want to be doing with your networks is to segment your networks. Now, it doesn't even matter if you are publicly hosting anything or making anything publicly available. You still should be protecting your networks. And the reason for this is if you get into any kind of the smart home stuff or any IoT devices or Internet of Things, or you have servers or management consoles, you still want to, segment those and kind of segregate them, because even if you aren't publicly exposing anything, as we mentioned, that doesn't mean that you can't get infected by some kind of malware, for instance. So the better you can segment your network, the better, because, for instance, if you have, say, a Proxmox server that's running, if you can get into the web UI of the Proxmox server, you then get control of all of the virtual machines that Proxmox host is running, and all those LXC containers and whatnot. And if you are running your Proxmox nodes in a cluster, if you can get access to just one of them, you get access to the entire cluster. So it's paramount that you keep that segregated, because if someone were to gain access to one of those, web UIs or one of those servers, they essentially get access to everything that they are hosting. So it doesn't matter how segmented the rest of your, virtual machines are within Proxmox. It doesn't matter to the threat actor because they have access to everything. So that is one reason why you want to ensure that specifically your management stuff is segmented off from the rest of your network. And this also goes for if you're running any kind of lights out management, or if you're on Dell, that would be like your iDRAC, or if you're on HPE, I think that's ILO is what they call it. Whatever the IPMI, like remote management interface is, you also want to ensure that is segmented off, because that essentially could give not only remote control to the system, but potentially even a remote console to the system, which again, if you're running something like Proxmox, would give the user complete access to the shell of the system, which then they could do whatever they wanted with virtual machines and whatnot. So, but also if they have access to the IPMI at all, they could still do things like remotely shut down your server, disable the fans, or do something else nefarious to make your server not have a good time, or just take it offline completely. So that is one thing you definitely want to do. And when it comes to network segmentation, there's a couple key things that you can do to improve your network segmentation. The first one is obviously firewalls, ensuring that you have firewall rules and ACLs, or access control lists, to kind of control the way that network traffic is able to flow through and around your network. And then, of course, VLANs, which also kind of play into this. So VLANs are, of course, virtual local area networks, are essentially ways that you can even further divide and segment up your network. If you have switches, some switches will, if you hear a switch is marketed as a managed switch, that generally means that it will have not necessarily have the ability to create VLANs. Usually it does, but at least give you some kind of management interface that you can go through and configure things. If you're using some router OS, like say pfSense, for instance, you have the ability to configure VLANs in there. And VLANs are a fantastic way to help better segment your network. And you can, set up things like those access control lists, like we talked about before, to help control, what VLAN can talk to what VLAN, what traffic can flow between VLANs. So, for instance, maybe you have a VLAN set up that has a DNS server on there, and you want all of the other VLANs to be able to use that DNS server, but you don't want them to access anything else on that VLAN. So you can, specifically create these ACLs, or access control lists, in order to allow them to connect to the DNS server to get handle their DNS queries, but not actually be able to access anything else on that VLAN. So there's a lot of things that you can do, to help better segment your network, and it is definitely something that you should be doing. And that is your cybersecurity tip for the week. Now let's get into WWDC in the preview, what to look forward to, what to expect. So, of course, the big things that we're expecting is the software updates. So, WWDC is Apple's worldwide developer conference, which they hold every year. And in case you didn't know, the developers conference is actually a week long, but the conference, of course, kicks off with the keynote, which is most widely known. But then throughout the week, they generally have various kinds of labs and, hands-on, demos and stuff for developers to be able to, play with these new tools that Apple just unveiled. So, as far as what we're also looking forward to, of course, the software updates. This is where Apple unveils their new releases for their software updates. So things like this year, it's going to be iOS 18, iPadOS 18, tvOS, watchOS, macOS, and visionOS. So supposedly, if the rumors are to be believed, there's allegedly going to be a lot of AI focus for this year's WWDC. Now, in fairness, I'm pretty sure they were saying that last year as well, and of course that didn't really come to fruition. But with how the AI boom has continued to move forward, I think Apple might. I mean, if we're talking from the investor perspective, I would assume if Apple doesn't, at least address AI in some meaningful capacity, the investors probably aren't going to be too thrilled with them, given how the markets have been going and how everything needing to be AI focused. But that's kind of besides the point. The rumors, at least anyway, is that there's going to be a very heavy AI focused. And one of those pieces of AI inspired alleged features, if you will, is coming to Xcode. Now, if you're familiar with GitHub Copilot, which is essentially a plugin that you can install in some various code editors to essentially help you write code, and it can generate code for you. If you remember, there's a whole lawsuit going on with GitHub Copilot because it's alleged that it stole code directly from open source projects and essentially claimed it was their own without addressing the license and whatnot. So allegedly, there is a GitHub Copilot-esque feature coming to Xcode. Now, if true, and depending on how it's implemented, I may or may not use it. I probably won't use it, since up until this point, I really haven't used AI to generate code for me. One, because I like writing code in general, and having an AI write it for me kind of defeats the purpose of me wanting to write code. Now, that's not to say that I haven't used AI in the past. Like I think I mentioned um, a few weeks ago when I was working, or probably a few months ago at this point, when I was working on my Clang format file. Like I really didn't know what I was doing because I had never really used it before. So I was asking, a large language model essentially how, what features to or toggles to enable or what settings to set in order to get this output that I wanted. And quite honestly, it was kind of a slog because if you've ever used a large language model, you know that it likes to make things up. So it would constantly, say, oh, yeah, you can just set this flag to be true and it'll do what you want. And sure enough, that flag does not exist. um, but I think I mentioned on an episode a while back, it can potentially be beneficial, but you also have to be knowledgeable about the things that you're asking it because it's so confident in what it's saying that if you have no idea what it's talking about, if you have no idea the subject matter that you're asking about, you'll have no way of knowing if the answer it's giving you is legit or not. Because if you ask it something that you're not necessarily a subject matter expert on, but you're at least very knowledgeable about, it becomes quite apparent some of the flaws and hallucinations in these large language models. And those don't go away when it's a subject or a topic that you're not familiar with. You just can't detect them. But when it comes to AI devices, personally for me, my main concern is if it is one on device and nothing is going to the cloud. Because going on a bit of a tangent here, some people think AI is spooky, and I don't necessarily fall into that camp because I know that in reality, all that these large language models are is just a series of complex calculus and linear algebra equations trying to essentially predict what the best thing to come next in a sequence is, which is why it can go on blabbering about completely made up things because it's just, a predictive model that, oh, this word has the highest percentage, pick that one. This one has the next highest percentage, pick that one. Of course, it's going off whatever data was trained on, but it's just going with what it thinks is the next best thing. It has no concept whatsoever of what is true or what it is saying, as seen in all the beautiful and sometimes hilarious hallucinations that it comes up with. Which, speaking of hallucinations, have you guys heard or seen some of the crazy hallucinations that Google's AI in its search has been spitting out? I think it was like maybe 2 weeks ago or something at this point. But one of the best ones was someone was asking, like ways that they can help improve their cheese on their pizzas, stick to the pizza sauce because it, was sliding off. And the Google AI recommended, quote, adding about 1/8 cup of non-toxic glue to the sauce to give it tackiness, or when it recommended that you eat rocks. So some very quality recommendations, of course, from the Google AI, and it totally didn't make those up, and it obviously totally knows what it is talking about because AI would never lie to us or make anything up. So. Aside from the fact that AI can sometimes mess up in quite hilarious ways, the main reason why I don't like it or have reservations about it is in large part because of, I guess you could say, the corporations behind it, if you will, and the whole, basically every response you give to an AI is essentially being harvested in order to train future AIs. So in reality, all this AI craze is a massive like data harvesting scheme that's going on to like just continuously give it data so it can train off of. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather not have every little thing I do or say to an AI be harvested to train a future AI or even build a profile on me. That's not really how I jive, right? If you've listened to the podcast long enough, you know that I am definitely a privacy advocate and don't like all the data harvesting schemes that go on from any of the various big tech companies out there. But even not just them, just, a lot of companies in general nowadays are, trying to harvest data because remember, if the service that's being provided is free, it's not actually free. You are the product, and your data is being harvested almost certainly. Now, of course, if the product is open source, we should make the clarification that people tend to think that just because a product is open source means that it doesn't spy on you or do any spooky business like that. It just generally doesn't, because people can look at it and be like, what the heck is this? and get it out of there. But mainly because, there's more eyes on the code and people can verify for themselves, what this code is actually doing, what this piece of software is actually doing. So that is one of the beauties of open source software, is you have the ability to go and inspect every single line of code to ensure that this piece of software that you're downloading or running or whatever isn't doing any funky business or trying to pull one over on you. But anyway, getting back to the point here, that's one of the reasons why I've self-hosted some of my own AI instances, like my own large language model and my own, stable diffusion, image generator, because I don't like the idea of a company harvesting my data, but I also still want to play around with these things because I think they're cool and I think they're fun. So anyway, tangent over, back to WWDC. So what am I looking forward to out of this WWDC? Well, first off, I think it'll be quite interesting to see what Vision OS updates we get, because of course this is the first year that we're actually going to be getting a major OS update for Vision OS, because of course the Vision Pro only came out, I believe, earlier this year. Was it like end of January, February timeframe, something like that? So it hasn't been out for all that long, but it will be the first major update we get for it. So it'll be definitely interesting to see what kind of new features get released with it. I'm also interested to see how many Macs, or specifically Intel Macs, survived the slaughter, and how many of them will lose support in the newest version of macOS, because this is one thing that we've been talking about pretty much since the podcast started, which is the absolute rate at which Apple has been killing off Intel Macs, which quite honestly, I don't blame them, because of course they want everyone to move to Apple Silicon. And if you've seen any of the comparisons between Intel Macs versus Apple Silicon Macs, it's honestly not even close. I mean, when the M1 Apple Silicon Macs came out, they were basically beating, or at least close to, the top of the top, the cream of the crop, the best of the best Intel Macs, aside from maybe the Mac Pro. But even in some cases, they were still beating the Mac Pro. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, if you are looking to buy an Intel Mac that's a used Intel Mac, I would strongly encourage you don't, unless you have a really, really, really good reason to buy it, because performance-wise, Apple Silicon's just going to blow it out of the water, because you can buy like M1 Mac Minis on eBay for easily like $350 if you're not looking that hard. And sometimes you can even find them less, but you can almost guarantee that you're going to be able to get yourself an M1 Mac Mini for less than $400, which is going to essentially destroy anything Intel related. And in some cases, if you're going for like an Intel MacBook Pro, I mean, you're going to be spending even less on the M1 Mac Mini. Now, granted, you'd have to, bring your own mouse, display, and keyboard and all that, but still, I mean, I'm also pretty sure that M1 MacBook Airs are also coming down in price at least a little bit. So the value there is just not there for Intel. So I completely understand why Apple is trying to kill off the Intel Macs. I totally understand it. It's just in some cases it was alarming to see the rate at which they were killing them off, since usually in the past when they were still on Intel, it was like they would kill off, 1 year of, generation wise. Like they would kill off only, the 2012 MacBook Pros, or they would only kill off the 2011 iMacs. But in recent years, they killed off, not only the 2015s, but the 2016s. They kill off multiple generation years of Intel Macs. So it'll be interesting to see how many Macs survive, and if the only one left standing is the Intel Mac Pro. Personally, I think the Intel Mac Pro, I think it's almost a lock that thing is still going to be supported under the new macOS version. I think the iMac Pro is probably also a fairly safe bet, although that one probably only has like maybe another year or so since it came out in 2017, I believe. And then aside for the rest of them, I mean, the 2019 MacBook Pros might still be supported, maybe the 2018s, but it's going to be close on those, I think. So yeah, I think it's going to be very slim pickings as far as the Intel Macs are concerned on what's still supported. So it'll be definitely interesting to see how many Intel Macs are still supported. But speaking of macOS, I'm also interested to see what their crack marketing team, as our boy Air Force One likes to say, what they come up with as far as the name goes. Because I have to say, probably one of my favorite parts of the WWDC keynote, aside from Craig Federighi himself, because I mean he just brings so much energy and is absolutely amazing and a fantastic presenter. But the one thing I always find very enjoyable is when he brings up the crack marketing team aspect and kind of goes on this little story of the crack marketing team before he, unveils what they're calling the newest macOS. So I am interested to see what it's going to be called. And then aside from that, Apple also tends to announce new features and SDKs and frameworks for various components that they're bringing to either iOS or macOS through, updates that they made to Swift. So I am interested to see, what additional features they're going to be bringing to the table to allow developers even more, access to the hardware and add even more capabilities. So that is definitely going to be interesting. So that is WWDC. I hope you are excited for it. We are going to be, of course, covering all the updates in next week's episode, so definitely be sure to tune in for that. And with that, let's get into what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week. So I'm not sure if this technically counts as nerdy things, because quite honestly, I don't know if I'd necessarily count it. But in the grand scheme of things, it also is kind of nerdy, so I just decided to throw it here anyway. And that is, I was doing LeetCode problems, or as some would say, grinding LeetCode. And I have quite mixed feelings about it. And I wanted to, the best way that I think I can express that to you guys is through a metaphor. And that being, LeetCode is the treadmill of software development. Now, let's break that down, and what do I actually mean by that? So, like a treadmill, some people enjoy walking or running on a treadmill, and others can't stand it. Personally, for me, I'm not a big fan of treadmills, and I try to avoid them at all costs unless I have to use one. Because I don't know about you guys, maybe I'm using it wrong, but whenever I get off a treadmill after, being on it for, maybe walking for like a half hour or 45 minutes or something, I always feel like the first few seconds to maybe a minute after I get off the treadmill, I don't quite feel right. Like, it almost feels like I have to relearn how to walk in a way. Like, it's just really weird. Like, you're moving, but nothing around you is moving. I prefer, real walking. But anyway, some people enjoy it. Now, I guess first we should get into what LeetCode is for those of you who aren't aware of what it is. So according to their website, LeetCode is, quote, the best platform to help you enhance your skills, expand your knowledge, and prepare for technical interviews. Now, what essentially this means is if you have done any kind of interviewing, especially with any of the FANG companies, that of course being, the big tech companies like, your Facebook, Apple, Amazon, what's the other, Netflix, even Microsoft, throw Microsoft in there, Nvidia, AMD, Intel, any of these big companies, you are going to go through a gauntlet of interviews. And some of those are going to be what they call technical interviews, where essentially they give you, as it's been known, LeetCode problems to essentially wean out the people that don't have their, data structures and algorithms down pat. So it doesn't matter if you have, programmed the coolest app in the world. If you totally bomb your technical interview, they don't want anything to do with you. So a lot of people, when they're trying to prepare for interviews, will tend to what they call grind LeetCode to essentially prepare themselves for the impending LeetCode-esque questions that come up. And what these questions are is they're quite honestly pointless, if I'm being quite honest. They're some very random and obscure use case where it wants you to do some kind of string manipulation, or it wants you to, rearrange an integer, like reverse an integer. That's one of them. A bunch of like this random stuff that like you're never gonna realistically, you're probably never going to be doing in the day-to-day work of the job, but like it kind of just is supposed to test like how well you can come up with solutions and write algorithms to solve these problems and whatnot. So this is why I kind of call it the treadmill of software development, because it's pretty good for training, just like a treadmill can be good for training, but it's not the same thing as the real deal, because when you're on a treadmill, you're locked at a set speed where normally if you're walking outside or running or even indoors, you get to control your own pace and set your own tempo and your own speed. So you can go, some people do like this high interval training, right? Where you like go really run as fast as you can for like 30 seconds, and then you like slow down for like, a minute or something, and then you run as fast as you can. Or you're trying to, control your pace and speed up, slow down, and, adjust your pace as needed. You can't really do that on a treadmill unless you're constantly fiddling with the number. And even then, you kind of can only slowly ramp up and slowly ramp down. You can't go at the pace that you want to. So it's a lot harder to adjust your pace. Similarly, with with the LeetCode versus regular programming projects, in LeetCode you're just doing this repetitive, problem after problem after problem, and you're not really accomplishing anything. Like, sure, you're building your skills, just like if you constantly run on a treadmill, you're building up your endurance, but at the end of the day, what are you really accomplishing, right? Like, yeah, sure, you're building up your endurance, you're able to run faster for longer, just like, if you're grinding LeetCode, as they say, yeah, you're getting better at, answering LeetCode problems, but how does that actually translate into actual software development skills, right? Like, I've heard stories of people on treadmills that they can do really good on a treadmill, but then, once they get out to running, in the real world, it's different, or vice versa. They're good at running in the real world, but then we get to the treadmill, they're not that great at it. So kind of the same thing with LeetCode as well. Some software developers are, able to write these amazing applications, but then you give them like a LeetCode problem and they're sitting there scratching their head for a while trying to figure out what the heck they're supposed to do. So kind of in the same vein there. Now, like I mentioned, personally, I can't stand treadmills and I don't like running. But that's not to say that I don't like running. And what I mean by that is I don't like the act of I'm going to run for the sake of running. That for me doesn't do it for me. But if, for instance, you have me playing some kind of sport where you do a lot of running, like basketball or football or even soccer, which I'm not really a big soccer guy, but any kind of sport where you're doing a lot of running, I'm more than happy, to, be constantly running, playing that sport. But if you ask me to just run the equivalent amount of time just for the sake of running, I'm not going to be into it. And to me, this, running in some kind of like sport case is what I would consider fun running, and running with a purpose, if you will. Like you're trying to accomplish something with your running, right? You're running to get to the basketball, or you're running to, defend your hoop, or you're running on the fast break to try to score, or, you're doing something productive with your running. You're not just running, right? Now, for me, that's, something that is a key distinction, but I know some people enjoy running just for the sake of running. And a treadmill to me is like running just for the sake of running, which is kind of similar to LeetCode, which is basically just coding for the sake of coding. Like, what are you really trying to accomplish here? Because yes, you're going to be building up your programming skills and whatnot, but you also don't have anything to show for it at the end of the day. And what I mean by that is, if we take it back to the sports example, if you are, running for, basketball, for instance, and you're running on a fast break and you score, you accomplished something with your running. You scored. But if you ran, say 2 miles on a treadmill, what did you accomplish? Yeah, you ran 2 miles, but I mean, what else did you accomplish? Now, people that are diehard runners are probably gonna, absolutely destroy me for this comparison. But but I'm just trying to, kind of do some kind of comparison to kind of essentially drive home the fact that LeetCode is mainly the training aspect and not necessarily the application aspect, if that makes sense. So, for instance, solving, some kind of arbitrary problem, it doesn't necessarily correlate to what you're going to be doing day to day as a software developer. And now you might hit a LeetCode problem that will, directly correlate with what you're trying to do. But in all honesty, most of those problems probably aren't necessarily going to correlate that well, at least on a one-to-one basis. Now, of course, the ability to come up with creative solutions and devise algorithms to solve problems is definitely going to be beneficial, but it's not like there's going to be a direct one-to-one comparison. And one thing that I, of course, have praised on I don't know how many occasions at this point, I'll probably sound like I'm beating a dead horse, is the value of, personal projects, but specifically in this case, projects in general. Because in my opinion, projects in general are the equivalent of playing sports. And what I mean by this is, when you're playing sports, like say let's go back to basketball. When you are playing basketball, if you're not a endurance runner, you're probably not going to be able to be out on the court for that long without getting like completely winded, right? But if you keep, playing basketball and you keep practicing basketball, eventually you'll slowly start to build up your endurance over time, even though you weren't focused on the actual running and building up of your endurance aspect. Similarly, if you're working on real projects, yeah, you might not get lots of practice with a bunch of string manipulation or integer reversals or other kinds of algorithm development or any of the fundamentals, quote unquote, that LeetCode will kind of drill home for you. But over time, as you work on these personal projects or just projects in general, you will get exposed to those things and slowly build up your skills over time. And in my opinion, have a lot more fun doing it, because at the end of the day, when you complete a project, you have a working thing that you can point to and say, I built that. Whereas if you're just grinding LeetCode, what do you point to? You point to all the test cases passing and your one function that completed it. I mean, I guess that's kind of cool, but in my opinion, a working project, a working piece of software is a lot more, I guess, I'm trying to think of the word. To me, it's something I'd want to have more than a single function with all the test cases passing on LeetCode. But that's personally just my opinion. Plus, you can go show around that cool project that you made to either your friends, family, potential future employers, whatever the case may be, as something that you built by yourself because you had a genuine passion for it rather than just, coding for the sake of coding, if you will. So yeah, it basically just gives you something to show off at the end of the day rather than just, a LeetCode thing, right? So, but that's not to say that, running on a treadmill is useless or doing LeetCode problems is useless, because that is completely not true at all. Because if you say are a basketball player and you really want to focus on your endurance, practicing, going to practice and playing the games is only going to get you so far, right? If you really want to focus on building up your endurance and being able to run for longer, to be able to stay out on the court longer, you're going to have to do some additional training in addition to practice, right? You're going to have to run for the sake of running and not for fun, right? You're going to have to run to build up your endurance, maybe even use a treadmill, or you could just run outside or around a track indoors or whatever it may be. You have to essentially run for the sake of running to build up your endurance. So similarly, if you're trying to sharpen up your software development skills to maybe make your ability to come up with algorithms to solve problems in your personal projects go quicker, or you're trying to train for the inevitable technical interview, as they call it, where you're essentially going to be given, these random programming, projects or problems that you have to solve with some kind of, algorithm that you have to make up, or you're, going into some kind of technical design or architecture decision that you're going to need to make sure that you really know your algorithms and data structures to be able to best identify solutions. All these are cases where grinding LeetCode might actually be worth it to help, improve your skills. And it definitely does have merit. So I'm not trying to diminish that at all, but just for me, focusing specifically on random problems that require you to use various tools in your software developer's toolbox is a better way, to make sure those tools stay sharp, which is, an advantage to LeetCode there, because, like any tools in your toolbox, you want to make sure that you're constantly using them and keeping them sharp and, not letting them atrophy, if you will. And for instance, if you're just working on personal projects, you're not going to necessarily be getting as much use out of all those tools as if you were to say, grind LeetCode problems, and really focus on actually sharpening those tools rather than just using them. Because like I said, of course, if you're, working on your own personal projects or just projects in general, if you're, working at a company, you're going to be using those skills and those tools that you have in your toolbox, devising algorithms, implementing data structures, that kind of a thing. But depending on the software you're working with, some things you won't really touch at all or touch very seldomly, and your skills in those areas might tend to wane a little bit. So for instance, if you are like focusing specifically on like databases and data structures, you might not necessarily get as much algorithms exposure as devising data structures. Or if you're, specifically focusing on, parsing input, you might be fantastic at string manipulations, but then when it comes to actually, implementing some kind of a data structure, you're a little iffy on that, right? So that is, somewhere where LeetCode actually comes into play and can be very handy, because it can specifically help you target and focus those areas where you might have a little bit of a weakness or where you're struggling to really sharpen those skills and improve those skills. Where if you're just specifically focusing on working on personal projects, you might not necessarily necessarily get to, touch all of those various areas or, be able to touch them as much and focus in on them. So just like, some people like running on the treadmill, some people like grinding LeetCode, some people like playing sports, some people like writing personal projects, but wherever you are on the spectrum, there's definitely an argument to be made that both are better than exclusively one or the other, right? It's like whenever there's any kind of argument out there, you have your two extremes. Usually, more often than not, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. So just like as much as I love personal projects and the idea that you should be focusing on, writing your own projects and working on projects to grow your software developer skills and, build up your portfolio and whatnot. It also can't be ignored, the fact that LeetCode does have its merits to especially hone and sharpen some of your skills because, like I mentioned, personal projects are fantastic. They're great. You definitely should be working on them. But depending on the projects that you're focusing on, you may or may not be hitting all of the things that, potential employers might be looking for or a potential future project might ask you to take on. So there definitely is benefit, to making sure that your skills still stay sharp because just like I mentioned, if we're going back to the sports analogy, even though if you only play the sport, you'll, build up your endurance over time. But if you really want to build up your endurance quickly and efficiently, that's where you kind of have to go to the treadmill, unfortunately. But, it is what it is. So hopefully this kind of comparison made sense to you, kind of gave you a different perspective. And if it did, definitely be sure to like the video if you're on YouTube or give it a rating if you're on a podcast. But before we finish for this week, we definitely should get back to that trivia question. So this week's trivia question, if you'll remember, is the Ada programming language was developed during the late 1970s to the early 1980s. The programming language was named after the individual who has been credited as the first computer programmer. What was this individual's name? If you said Ada Lovelace, congratulations, you got this week's trivia question correct. Ada Lovelace is indeed the person that the Ada programming language is named after. And if you enjoyed this episode, again, I ask that you leave it a rating and review and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And be sure to leave a like or a comment or a rating wherever you are. And be sure to share it around as well. And if you have any questions or topics or comments for future episodes, be sure to leave me a comment, whether you're on YouTube, or shoot me an email at contact@darkassassins.inc.com. Of course, that's down in the show notes below. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.